He fired her, but didn't know about the access key. How is that possible?
3 days after they fired me, their entire system stopped existing. Let that sink in for a second. Not slowed down. Not glitching. Gone. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Imagine raising $10 million, celebrating like you've just made it, and then waking up to find the thing you sold doesn't even turn on. That's exactly what happened. And somehow, it all traced back to me. My name is Maya Chen, I'm 34, and until recently, I was the lead systems architect at a fintech startup called Virion Pay. Translation? I built everything that actually worked. Not the pitch decks, not the investor demos, not the flashy UI that got applause in boardrooms. I built the infrastructure underneath it all, the part nobody claps for, until it breaks. And 3 days after I was gone, it did. Let me take you back to that room, because everything started there. A long glass table, floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of place designed to make people feel important. Investors lined up on one side, our leadership team on the other. And at the center of it all, Daniel Cross, CEO, charismatic in that calculated, almost rehearsed way. The kind of guy who could sell confidence even when things were falling apart behind the scenes. That day, though, nothing was falling apart. Everything worked. The platform loaded instantly. Transactions processed clean. No delays, no errors, not even a flicker. I knew why. Because I had stress tested it for weeks, quietly, thoroughly, fixing things no one else even knew were problems. And when the final demo ended, silence. Then applause. Real applause. $10 million. Secured. People stood up. Hands were shaken. Smiles everywhere. You could feel the shift in the room, like the company had just crossed some invisible line into legitimacy. Daniel was glowing. Liam, our CTO, looked relieved more than anything. And me? I just sat there for a second, not smiling, not celebrating, just breathing. Because I knew exactly how fragile that success actually was. Here's the thing no one tells you about systems like that. They don't fail loudly. They fail quietly, in ways that don't show up until the wrong person makes the wrong move. And in that room, I started to realize something uncomfortable. No one else really understood what I had built. Not fully, not the dependencies, not the safeguards, not the parts I deliberately didn't simplify. Hey, Maya. I looked up. Daniel was standing beside me smiling. Not the big public smile, a smaller one. Controlled. Can I grab you for a second? Something about the tone felt off, not urgent, not excited, just deliberate. We stepped out into the hallway. The noise of celebration faded behind the glass door. Now it was just the two of us. Quiet, too quiet. Daniel adjusted his jacket, exhaled once, then looked at me like he was about to discuss something routine, like scheduling or timelines. Instead, he said, "We're replacing you." No build-up, no hesitation, just that. Clean, final. For a second, I thought I misheard him. Not because the words were unclear, but because the timing didn't make sense. We had just closed $10 million. The system had just performed flawlessly. Everything that mattered had worked. And now this? We need someone with more experience at this level, he added. Still calm, still polite, like he was doing me a favor. I didn't argue. That's the part people don't expect. No shock, no anger, no you can't do this. I just looked at him and nodded. Once, because in that exact moment, something clicked. Not emotionally. Technically, a quiet realization. One that Daniel clearly didn't share. One that no one in that building seemed to understand yet. He smiled, like the conversation was over. Like the transition would be seamless. Take the rest of the day, he said. We'll take it from here. We'll take it from here. I walked back inside. People were still celebrating, laughing, toasting, already talking about scaling, expansion, the next round. And I just went to my desk, opened my laptop, and started packing. No one stopped me. No one asked questions. Because in their minds, the hard part was already done. But as I unplugged the final cable, I couldn't help thinking, do they even know what they just took from here? 3 days later, their platform wouldn't load. And the first person to ask the real question didn't say it out loud. They whispered it. Where's the access key? And that's when my phone rang. The system didn't break. It was never fully theirs. Let me explain something most people in that office never bothered to understand. Virion Pay didn't run on code alone. It ran on structure, on layered logic, on decisions that weren't visible unless you knew exactly where to look. And I did because I built it. When I first joined, the platform was barely more than a concept. A few rough prototypes, some outsourced components stitched together just well enough to demo. Daniel saw a product. I saw a liability. So I rebuilt it. Quietly, methodically, piece by piece. The core system wasn't just designed to process transactions, it was designed to control how those transactions could exist. That meant every deployment required authentication across multiple layers. Every update triggered internal verification loops. Every access point was tied to a hierarchy that actually meant something. Not just passwords. Not just permissions. Control. Liam, the CTO, trusted me. But he didn't dig deep. He understood architecture in theory, but not in practice at scale. Not like this. So when I explained things, I simplified. Not because I wanted to hide anything, but because there was never time. Daniel, he didn't care about any of it. To him, the system was a product. Something you show. Something you sell. Something that, once funded, could be handed off, upgraded, replaced. That assumption, that's where everything started to fracture. There were moments, small ones at first, I'd flag a risk. Hey, we shouldn't push this update without revalidating the authentication chain. Daniel would wave it off. We need speed, Maya. Investors don't care about back-end nuance. Or I'd mention dependencies. If we scale without restructuring this layer, it could lock us out. He'd smile. We'll fix it later. Later never comes in systems like this. Only consequences do. So I adapted. Not outwardly. Outwardly, I delivered exactly what they needed. The demos worked. The system scaled on the surface. But underneath, I made decisions. Careful ones. I built a centralized authorization framework. Not a single key. Not something simple enough to pass around casually. Something deeper. Think of it like this. You can have the entire machine, every component, every line of code. But if you don't have the mechanism that tells the machine who is allowed to run it, it doesn't matter. It won't move. That mechanism, it wasn't documented fully. Not because I was hiding it, but because no one asked the right questions. And that's the part people always get wrong. They assume control is obvious, visible, transferable. It's not. Not if it's designed correctly. The day I was fired, I didn't sabotage anything. I didn't delete files. Didn't lock accounts. Didn't trigger failures. I left everything exactly as it was. But I also didn't hand over something critical. Something no one explicitly requested. Because they didn't even know it existed. And that's the difference. Back at Virion Pay, 3 days after I walked out, the engineers weren't dealing with a crash. They were dealing with absence. Deployment attempts failed. Authentication loops stalled. Access requests returned nothing. Not errors. Nothing. Imagine pressing a button and the system just refuses to acknowledge you. Not wrong. Just irrelevant. That's what they were facing. Liam tried to trace it. He dug through logs, configs, system layers, but every path led back to the same invisible wall. Something was missing. Something fundamental. And then someone, probably one of the junior engineers, said it quietly, almost like they weren't supposed to. Where's the access key? The room went still. Because suddenly that question made everything worse. Not better. Because if there was a key and no one knew where it was, then maybe they never actually had control of the system at all. And that's when Daniel decided to call me. But here's the real question. Was he asking for help or realizing for the first time what he had just lost? They had the system, just not the part that made it run. By the time Daniel called me, things inside Virion Pay weren't just tense. They were unraveling. Picture this. It's early morning, the kind where everyone pretends things are still under control. Slack messages are firing off every second. Anyone fix the deployment issue? Why is staging locked? Why can't we authenticate transactions? No answers. Just noise. Liam had already been up all night, running diagnostics, rechecking configs, rolling back updates that weren't even the problem. Because that's what people do when they don't understand the system they're trying to fix. They assume something broke. But nothing broke. That was the problem. Every log said the same thing. Access denied. Not error. Not failure. Denied. Which made no sense. Because according to their internal permissions, they should have had full control. That contradiction, that's what started the panic. Investors began calling. Not casually. Not checking in. Demanding answers. Why is the platform offline? Why are transactions failing? Are we exposed? And the worst one, was the demo real? Inside the office, conversations shifted. Less technical. More accusatory. How did we not know about this? Who signed off on the system design? Why wasn't this documented? And eventually, why did we let her go? That question, no one wanted to answer it, because answering it meant admitting something dangerous. They didn't understand what Maya actually did. And that's when my phone rang. Unknown number. But I already knew who it was. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Then I answered. Maya. Daniel's voice. But not the same voice from the boardroom. Gone was the polish, the control. This one was tighter. Careful. Daniel. I kept my tone neutral. A pause. Not long, but long enough to say something without words. We're having a small issue with the platform, he said. Small. That word almost made me smile. What kind of issue? I asked. Another pause. Then, it's not launching. Not, it's slow. Not, there's a bug. It's not launching. Now we were being accurate. The system is returning access errors, he continued. We just need the key. There it was. The word they'd finally found. I leaned back slightly, letting the silence stretch. Because this moment, it mattered. There isn't just one key, I said. Another pause. Longer this time. What do you mean? He asked. I could picture it. Him standing in that glass office. Liam nearby, listening. Everyone waiting for this call to fix everything. The system uses layered authorization, I explained. Primary access is tied to a multi-factor chain. You can't just plug something in and unlock it. That's fine, he said quickly. Just walk us through it. Walk us through it. Like it was a checklist. You don't have the components, I said. Silence. What components? His voice tightened. The authentication chain is distributed, I continued. Parts of it are time-sensitive, parts of it are identity-bound. Now he understood something. Not everything, but enough. You built a lock, he said slowly. I didn't answer immediately, because that wasn't quite right. I built a system, I said, one that doesn't hand over control without verification. And we're verified, he snapped. No, I replied calmly. You're authorized on paper. That distinction? It hit harder than anything else I could have said. Because on paper, they owned everything. The company, the product, the code. But in reality, ownership is only as real as your ability to use what you own. And right now, they couldn't use any of it. What do you want, Maya? Daniel asked. And there it was. The shift. Not how do we fix this, but what do you want? This wasn't a technical problem anymore. It was leverage. I let the question sit for a second. Not to be dramatic, but to be precise. Because the truth was, this situation, it wasn't an accident, But it also wasn't revenge. It was something else entirely. Before we talk about that, I said, "You need to understand what you're dealing with." "And what's that?" he asked. I took a breath, then said the one thing he wasn't ready to hear. "The system didn't lock you out. It recognized that you're no longer supposed to be in control." Silence, heavy, uncomfortable. Because now, this wasn't about a missing key. It was about a system that had made a decision. And the real question was, could it be reversed? Fixing it wasn't the question, control was. By the time I walked back into Virion Pay's office, the energy had completely changed. 3 days. That's all it took. 3 days to turn confidence into silence. No music. No chatter. No celebratory buzz from the funding round. Just tension. The kind that sits in the air and doesn't move. People noticed me immediately. Of course they did. You don't quietly re-enter a company you were just fired from, especially not like this. Heads turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Someone actually stood up like they weren't sure whether to greet me or apologize. I didn't acknowledge any of it. I just kept walking. Straight toward the center of the room. Daniel was already there. Waiting. And for the first time since I'd known him, he didn't look in control. No confident posture. No polished smile. Just someone trying very hard to keep things from slipping further. "Maya," he said. Simple. Measured. "Daniel." Liam stood a few feet behind him, arms crossed, eyes locked on me. Not defensive, not hostile. Just searching. Like he was trying to finally understand something he should have understood months ago. "Can you take a look?" Daniel asked. No ego. No framing. Just direct. I nodded once and moved past them. Sat down at one of the main terminals. Opened the system. Everything was exactly how I left it. Clean. Stable. Intact. That's the part that unsettles people the most. They expect damage. Something obvious. A failure they can point to. But there wasn't one. I navigated through the layers. Authentication logs, deployment chains, access structures. Everything responded the same way. Neutral, closed, waiting, not broken, not resisting, just unresolved. After a few minutes, I leaned back slightly. "Well?" Daniel asked. There was tension in that word. Pressure. Expectation. "It's functioning as designed," I said. That answer didn't help him. "What does that mean?" He pushed. "It means nothing is wrong," I replied. Upbeat. "Then why doesn't it work?" he snapped. Now we were getting somewhere. I turned slightly in my chair, looking at both him and Liam. "Because you don't have authorization," I said. "We do have authorization," Daniel shot back immediately. "We own the company." There it was again. Ownership. I shook my head once. "You have legal ownership," I said. "You don't have system authority." Liam stepped forward now. Finally engaging. "Explain that," he said. So I did. Not simplified. Not softened. "The platform runs on a master authorization protocol," I said. "It's tied to origin-level credentials, the person who built and initialized the system." Liam's expression shifted slightly. He was starting to see it. "When control changes at the top level," I continued, "the system requires revalidation, not approval revalidation." "And we didn't pass it," Liam said quietly. "No," I replied. Daniel exhaled sharply. Frustration bleeding through now. "Why would you design it like that?" he demanded. That question hung in the air. Because the answer wasn't technical. It wasn't designed for convenience, I said. It was designed for stability. "That doesn't answer the question," he said. I held his gaze. "You didn't listen," I said. Silence. "You pushed for speed over structure. You ignored dependency risks. You wanted something you could control without understanding." Each word landed heavier than the last. "So I built a system that doesn't allow that. No anger, no raised voice. Just clarity." "And now?" Daniel asked. Now we were at the real point. Not the system. Not the failure. Power. I stood up slowly, closed the terminal. turned to face him fully. "Now," I said, "you find out what I'm actually worth." No one spoke, because they all understood what that meant. This wasn't about fixing a bug. This was negotiation. And for the first time since the funding round, Daniel wasn't the one in control. But here's the part no one in that room had fully grasped yet. Even if they agreed to my terms, even if I gave them access, there was still something they hadn't considered. Something bigger than control. Something that would outlast this moment entirely. And it was about to change everything. What actually happened? That's the question everyone asks at the end of a story like this. Was it sabotage? Revenge? Some hidden back door designed to bring everything down? No, it was none of those things. Here's the truth, clean, simple, and a lot less dramatic than people expect. The system did exactly what it was built to do. When I designed Virion Pay's infrastructure, I didn't just think about scale or speed. I thought about control, not in the sense of ownership on paper, but operational control. Who can run it? Who can authorize it? Who understands it well enough to safely expand it? So I built something called a founder lock protocol. Not a literal founder, not a legal title. A technical origin point. The system anchored itself to the identity of its primary architect, me. Not because I wanted power, but because every critical layer deployment, authentication, transaction validation was interconnected through decisions only one person fully understood. If that person was removed, the system didn't crash. It paused. Restricted mode. Think of it like a vault that doesn't slam shut but quietly refuses to open. That's why there were no error messages. No warnings. No obvious failure points. Because nothing was broken. The platform simply didn't recognize its operators as valid controllers anymore. That's the logical payoff. No mystery, no hidden trick. Just a system enforcing the rules it was built on. Now the part people really care about. What happened next? Back in that room after I said, "You find out what I'm worth," everything shifted. Not instantly, but undeniably. Daniel didn't argue, didn't threaten, didn't try to reassert control. Because he couldn't. The investors were already circling. The board was already asking questions. And every hour the platform stayed down. The company lost credibility, money, trust. So we negotiated, not emotionally, not dramatically, precisely. I laid out terms, clear, structured, non-negotiable. I would return as an independent systems consultant, not an employee. Full authority over platform architecture decisions. A compensation package significantly higher than my previous salary. And most importantly, a controlled knowledge transfer process. That last part, that's what changed everything. Because I wasn't just fixing a system anymore. I was redesigning how control existed inside the company. Daniel agreed. He didn't have leverage not to. The board approved it within hours. Because at that point, this wasn't about pride. It was about survival. And then I fixed it. Not with a single key. Not with some dramatic unlock moment. Step by step. Revalidating the authorization chain. Rebinding system control to a distributed credential structure. Documenting every layer that had previously lived only in my head. It took 36 hours. When the platform finally came back online, there was no applause this time. Just relief. Quiet, exhausted relief. Transactions processed again. Dashboards lit back up. Investors stopped calling every hour. But something had changed. And everyone felt it. Daniel especially. He still held the title of CEO. Still ran meetings. Still spoke to investors. But the dynamic? It was different. Because now he understood something he didn't before. Control isn't declared. It's built. And more importantly, it can't be transferred instantly just because you decide it should be. The board started watching him more closely. Not aggressively, but carefully. Decisions that used to happen quickly slowed down. Questions that were once ignored started getting asked. Liam changed too. He spent more time in the system, actually learning it, not just overseeing it. We talked more in those weeks than we had in the previous year. Not as boss and subordinate, but as engineers, trying to make sure this never happened again. And me? I finished what I came back to do. The system became stronger, more transparent, less dependent on any single person, including me. Exactly how it should have been from the beginning if anyone had listened. When everything was stable, I left. Again. But this time, it was on my terms. No quiet packing, no hallway conversation, no sudden replacement. Just a final meeting. A signed contract completed. And a clean exit. Daniel shook my hand. Firm, respectful, not because he wanted to, but because now he understood. As I walked out of the building, no one stopped me. But this time, it felt different. Not invisible. Not dismissed. Recognized. Outside, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I glanced at it for a second, then silenced it. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't the one holding something together anymore. And I didn't need to be. That's the part most people miss. This wasn't a story about revenge. It was about alignment. A system reflecting the reality of the people running it. And what happens when those two things don't match? In the end, Virion Pay survived. But not in the way they expected. Stronger. More cautious. More aware. Because now they knew exactly what had been holding everything together all along. And exactly what it cost to lose it. No mystery. No cliffhanger. Just the truth. Some systems don't fail when you remove the wrong person. They wait until you realize you never understood them in the first place.
So, tell me, was this a mistake or did she plan every second of it?